Ukraine has on several occasions, despite its officials denying it, carried out drone attacks on targets inside of Russia.
How do we know that Russia hasn't staged this in order to justify retaliation?
We don't, and I think the one thing that we know coming out of this is that the one thing we can be sure of is that Russia will use this to escalate in some way, be that further attacks on Kyiv. There was a U.S. State Department notice given out today to any Americans still in Ukraine to be on extra alert for missile attacks, and theoretically use it to bolster its recruitment drives to replace the hundreds of thousands of soldiers it's lost in Ukraine. Most U.S. officials and analysts I've talked to cast the attack as being very unlikely to have been an attempted assassination on Putin. Putin doesn't sleep in the Kremlin, and the drone that was used was a very small drone, unlikely to pack the sort of explosives needed to take out someone like someone as well protected as Putin. And so the motivations and how this occurred are fairly murky. A reasonable argument is that this is some sort of false flag operation done by the Kremlin as they confront their mounting losses in Ukraine and try to raise more troops that they need if they want to keep prosecuting the war.
So they're sort of trying to give the picture of sort of national urgency. Look, there's been an attack on our president. Please throw yourselves forward. I mean, I had thought that there were, thousands more recruits, certainly throughout the last 6 months or so, thousands more recruits had been, trained up and ready to fight in the war. But is that not the case? There was some concern, wasn't there, in Russia about, men effectively being sort of, slightly taken against their will and coerced into the war.
They have. And for Russia, though, it may not be enough. Recently, Russia introduced a law that allows them to issue draft service summons to people electronically, further evidence that they're trying to ramp up the number of people that they can recruit for the war as they take absolutely devastating losses in places like Bakhmut, using things like human wave tactics. I would say also to note this drone attack, if it is indeed a false flag operation by Russia, and it's still possible somehow from Ukraine, it comes right before Russia's May 9th victory celebrations, celebrating victory in World War II, which is a huge deal symbolically. So pairing some sort of treacherous attack on Moscow with those celebrations will definitely tug at a lot of Russians' heartstrings.
Yeah. Would Ukraine take the fight to Russia's territory? Is that just going to be an absolute no, do you think? Or do you see any circumstance in which they would?
I think that is one of the things that makes this whole issue so complicated, is that Ukraine has on several occasions, despite its officials denying it, carried out drone attacks on targets inside of Russia. Mostly those have been attacks that or entirely, as far as I'm aware, those have been attacks against military bases that were vital to the war effort in Ukraine. It's steered away entirely from attacking symbolic type locations in Russia, largely at the urging of U.S. officials, who again reiterated today to me that they discourage Ukraine from carrying out attacks inside Russia. So it is. This attack has already generated all sorts of positive sentiment among Ukrainians. It certainly sells very well emotionally. It's hard to say Ukraine doing this on a more systemic, large-scale level, just because it does threaten support from the U.S. and the U.K. and other key NATO allies by being escalatory in nature.
So Zelensky today saying we don't attack Putin or Moscow, we fight on our own territory. That's not strictly true.
It's not strictly true, no.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about the fact that the Kremlin has, cancelled Victory Day parades. We know that Red Square has been on lockdown, hasn't it, for the last couple of weeks? An unprecedented security measure before Victory Day. That is significant, isn't it? Because that is, Russia clearly indicating that they feel that there is a threat, even if you've got airborne missiles coming over the border from Ukraine, you've still got Russia recognising that there are security issues here within their own country.
Yeah, it's really dramatic, from saying that Russia would take Kyiv in 3 days, as we know from documents from Russia, to being concerned about safety in Moscow on an important celebration day for them. So it's really been a turn of events. But it does feed into the Russian propaganda narrative that It's not Russia invading Ukraine, but Russia fighting against the West, fighting against the U.S. and the U.K. and all NATO and the other NATO allies, and that Russians need to band together to defend the motherland, if you will, against foreign threats.
One theory is that the drones were launched by Russian partisan fighters opposed to the war, who are based on Russian soil. What is the likelihood? What is the speculation, I suppose? Where does that stand at the moment on the threat, the genuine threat to Vladimir Putin's life via assassination?
Sure. In terms of the actual threat of assassination, obviously Putin has built up a very secure state with multiple forms of intelligence agencies, military, et cetera, all devoted to preserving his security. It was reported a few months ago that he travels on a special armored train across Russia, specifically because of fear of assassination, that classic dictator mindset. That said, there does appear to be a credible increase of Russian resistance within the country. I mean, that's always going to be a small number of people, of motivated people, but it's not lunacy to think that they exist. There's been train derailments. There's been many instances of people throwing Molotov cocktails into draft enlistment offices, thereby burning up any files people would have, the state would have had. And there's been one or two interviews with various Russian groups that are in favor of resisting, military resisting against the state. There's obviously groups in Ukraine that are fighting on behalf of the Ukrainian government, composed of Russian volunteers. So it's not crazy to think that this either could be an attempt by Russians within the country, or that such attempts might grow and definitely encouraged by Ukraine.
And if you enjoyed that, you can listen to me, Kate Borsay, every evening, Monday to Thursday, 8 until 10 on the evening edition on Times Radio.